Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are digging into a really comprehensive and philosophical conversation between two major public figures.
Right, and we're trying to extract their core framework, how they process things like power, duty, and just the chaos of the modern world.
Exactly. This source material, it's not just another take on politics.
Yeah.
Well, it's a deep meditation on what happens when people with huge influence have to confront these massive questions about their own integrity.
About systemic corruption, their spiritual beliefs, all of it.
So our mission for this deep dive is to cut through all that noise and give you, the learner, the operating system these individuals are using. We want to find those aha moments about what influence really means today.
And we're going to unpack, I think, four main areas. First, that personal battle between wanting peace and accepting responsibility.
Then there's this premise they have that all global conflict is really a spiritual war.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Then the psychological torment of trading your integrity for power. And finally, and this is crucial, how economic debt is fueling a whole new generation of radical political voices.
Okay, let's jump in. Let's start with that foundation, that internal battle, the pull of retreat versus the weight of what they call a moral obligation.
It's so relatable. I mean, both speakers, they admit to having this really intense, deep-seated desire to just check out, to leave the conversation entirely.
And they give these really vivid pictures of it, right?
Totally. One talks about a remote fishing camp up near Canada with his dogs. The other one mentions a small, inexpensive hunt cabin just in the middle of nowhere.
These aren't just vacation spots. They see them as genuine refuges, places for beauty, for clarity, away from what they call the ugly modern world.
But here's the turn. Almost as soon as they describe this desire for peace, they label it a form of self-indulgence.
So seeking peace is selfish.
In their view, it can be. It can be a way of shirking your duty. They wrestle with this idea that the more blessed you are with talent or position or whatever, the deeper your obligation is to sacrifice that personal comfort for a bigger mission.
That's a very different definition of leadership than we usually hear.
Oh, completely. For them, true leadership isn't some flat, equal structure. It's a hierarchy, but one based on duty and sacrifice. The greater the blessing, the deeper the obligation.
And for one of them, it took something pretty drastic, something really painful, to pull him back into that public fight.
Yes. He talks about being spurred back into action by a friend's encouragement, but also the tragic murder of another friend.
Now, we do have to pause here for a quick but very important correction.
Yeah, absolutely. The source material mistakenly names Charlie Kirk in this context. We're going to be very clear. Charlie Kirk is alive and well. Right. The speaker was actually referring to the very real murder of a different public figure, another friend of his.
Right, and that tragic event became the emotional breaking point for him.
It was the catalyst. It led him to this huge philosophical realization. He has a moral obligation to tell the truth, to pursue his mission, even if he doesn't live to see it succeed.
And this is where they introduce a metaphor that sort of becomes the spine for the whole discussion.
The oak tree metaphor.
Yeah.
You plant the oak tree. You do it because it's your duty to future generations, knowing full well you will never, ever sit in its shade.
So if your whole mission is on that kind of timeline, a multi-generational one, what does that do to your day-to-day political thinking? It just erases things like short-term polling, right?
It has to. It completely redefines what success even looks like. It also, and this is key, it removes the emotional sting of a temporary defeat.
Because you expect it.
You expect it. And if you're operating on a duty-based timeline, you just can't afford to be surprised by predictable chaos or corruption. Which brings us right to their next big idea.
The framework for understanding global conflict.
Right. Their central premise is that you just can't understand what's happening today unless you accept that a spiritual war is underway. That's the lens for everything.
And how do they define the two sides in that war?
It's a binary. On one side, you have God, which they say represents creation, order, life. And on the other, you have opponents who are fundamentally aligned with destruction, with chaos.
So, chaos for chaos's sake.
Pretty much. One of them describes watching the George Floyd riots in 2020 and having this realization that the goal was just destruction. There was no plan to rebuild, no constructive vision behind it, just destruction.
Okay, so if you're in a spiritual war, what's the main weapon the other side uses?
They say it's goading you into hatred. Spiritual evil gets stronger, it wins. When it successfully makes its opponents just as bitter and chaotic as it is.
When it turns you into a mirror image of itself.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really interesting. They conclude that if the goal of evil is to generate hatred, then the only kryptonite against it is love and its many cousins.
And they get specific about what that means. It's not just love.
No, it's also amusement, cheerfulness. In this framework, being able to laugh at your enemy, to find them absurd, that actually diminishes their power.
But there's a tension there, isn't there? How do you square being cheerful and amused with also, waging an aggressive political war?
And that tension is their whole struggle. They'd argue that cheerfulness isn't surrender. It's a weapon. It comes from recognizing the enemy's weakness and not being constantly shocked by what they do.
Ah, the shock. They keep coming back to that. Being surprised by betrayal.
Yeah, they're both deeply frustrated with themselves for it. They finally conclude that being shocked is actually a form of self-deception. It's refusing to believe the predictable reality of, human sin and betrayal that they've seen 1,000 times.
So they decided to just stop being shocked. To accept that corruption is what you get when integrity is traded for power.
And that acceptance lets them analyze it more clearly. They talk about systemic betrayal, referencing things like the lack of full disclosure on the JFK files or, more recently, the Epstein files.
A key insight they share here is about the unmasking of power. The idea that the people we think are in charge, senators, even the president, often aren't.
No, they're subject to what they call enormous pressures from other forces, other interests, that are really holding the levers of control.
And that pressure leads to what they call the danger of the deal, the bargain that leaders are offered.
Power in exchange for your integrity.
And they describe the people who take that deal as being in a hell on earth. It's not just about losing your morals, it's the torment of realizing you've become a captive. You're not powerful, you're owned.
You've sold your freedom for a title or comfort, and now the system has you. That psychological torment is, for them, the real core of systemic betrayal.
And what's driving that pressure? What's the real-world consequence that pushes people into those compromises?
The economy. They argue it's a rigged economy. Specifically, the financial exploitation at the heart of the U.S. system. The main mechanism of control is debt.
Specifically, the crushing debt loads on young people.
Yeah, and they use that drug dealer analogy. If a drug dealer is the problem for the addict, why aren't lenders held accountable for usury? They point out that a payday loan can have a legal annual rate of 600%. It's insane.
So the core economic problem, as they see it, is that the whole system relies too much on non-productive industries.
Exactly. Finance and real estate, mainly. Things that don't create new, tangible value, but instead generate wealth by managing assets or, leveraging debt, rent-seeking behavior.
And they say both parties are totally complicit.
Completely. Neither party is willing to seriously challenge the banks or the underlying debt mechanism.
Which brings us to the social landscape, what one speaker calls the great sorting. And this is where the source material gets extremely controversial. We need to be clear that we are impartially relaying their specific framing here.
Yes, absolutely. The source material puts forward an argument that there's a systematic, deliberate process leading to what they call the destruction of the white world.
And by that they mean historically majority white Christian countries.
Right. And they cite a few things they see as evidence for this. One is mass immigration that they say is happening against the will of the people. Another is what they call institutionalized anti-white policies at places like Harvard.
They also point to state-sponsored programs like MAID in Canada Medical Assistance in Dying.
And they make the specific claim that MAID disproportionately targets what they term legacy whites, who, in their words, have been brainwashed into mass suicide.
So the intent behind all this, according to them, is racial hostility from leaders who have a homicidal hatred for their own people.
And this viewpoint, however controversial it is the lens through which they understand the deep political anger that's driving the next generation.
But they connect that anger back to economics, too. They say the reason young people are drawn to more radical figures isn't just ideology.
No, it's primarily economic betrayal and institutional disrespect. It's young men feeling, well, screwed. They're facing insane debt, no opportunity, and then they're told they're the problem. Toxic masculinity, white racism, etc.
And that feeling, that's what's fueling the rise of these totally unmediated, fearless figures online. They mention Nick Fuentes as an example.
And they argue his appeal isn't even necessarily his specific ideology. It's his willingness to be, as they put it, unusually articulate and totally fearless in saying things no one else will.
This is why they're so committed to free speech. They argue that trying to cancel an idea just never works.
It backfires. They bring up the historical example of trying to eliminate Jesus. You can't kill an idea. They say the only real counter to a falsehood is the truth.
Which brings us all the way back around to the power of the word.
Exactly. Their ultimate conviction is that only the spoken word, if it's true, has the real power to change history, to change hearts. That word, they believe, will last long after all the money and political wins are gone, long after we're all in our graves.
And they frame the current crisis as this looming choice between two very extreme outcomes.
On one path, you have a fully totalitarian government that uses surveillance and digital currency to ensure everyone complies.
And the other path.
The alternative, they argue, if people are told their votes don't matter and their speech is suppressed, is violent revolution.
A pretty stark choice. It really all comes back to that personal integrity, doesn't it? The willingness to speak the truth, no matter the cost.
It does. And that brings us to the final provocative thought they want to leave you, the listener, with. It's a challenge, really.
First, how often are you still shocked by the predictable corruption you see in the world? Is there any value in pretending to be surprised anymore?
Or does recognizing the predictable nature of it all, as they argue, actually free you from cynicism? And maybe more importantly, what's the boundary you have to hold, personally, to avoid that temptation of compromise?
Especially when the reward is huge, financial, political, whatever, but the cost is your integrity.
Because as one of them concludes, the ultimate defeat for a man isn't losing an election or money. It's losing the respect of his wife. Think about that personal cost when you see the systemic failures of those in power.